Hey, it's Greg here at Catalyst Transformation Institute, and I want to talk with you about some common phrasings that have been coming up in the last few years that I really think it's time to get some clarity around. There are three common ways to hear this phrase, and I'm going to share them with you real quickly, and you're going to recognize them right away. The first phrase, or the first version of this phrase, is, do you. Hey you, do you. Or, be you. That's the second option with that, right? Be you, just be you. Yeah? And the other option is be authentic. Now, this is really interesting because words like this and phrases like this that become popular are really telling about where we are as a human race. And what I mean by that is people are craving, and you probably are too, people are craving to have permission to be who they are and live who they want, how they want to live, and have a good life, right? And do good things, and just the intention with this phrasing is very positive, right? It's very positive intention. However, how do you do that? How do you be you? How do you do you? This is the conversation that's not happening right now because everybody's saying do you, be you, and yet we have more crime than we've ever had. We have higher suicide rates than we've ever had. We have a morality that's falling apart, and we're struggling as a people in a lot of ways. Now, not in every way. There's a lot of good things that are still happening, but yet we do have some of the things that are challenging. And yet when people are talking about be you, and we're not having the rest of the conversation about how, then how will it ever work? So let's talk about that for a minute. I want to get some real clarity around this. And so the whole idea around this concept of be you or do you has a prerequisite to it. Okay? It's the prerequisite that nobody's talking about. And the prerequisite is that you must know thyself to be thyself. You cannot be what you do not know, right? And on the surface, it may seem like, I know myself, I know me, I know, that's because you live with yourself all of the time. You're familiar with yourself, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're always in tune with or in connection with or community with our truest self. So, let's talk about a little bit more what this looks like here. Unfortunately, the reason that it feels like we know ourselves, but there's a disconnect, is because of what I call the practice of non-evaluation. The practice of non-evaluation. We're so busy living our lives and our days and doing the similar things and the habits that we do every single day, day after day, year after year, that we rarely, if ever, pause to evaluate, am I even being my authentic self? Do I even know what that is so that I can determine if I'm actually being it? You see, I always work with people and share with them this concept to ask themselves, hey, is your Kung Fu working? Is your Kung Fu working means you're taking these actions, you're doing these things, but is it getting you what you want? And if you want to be you and do you and be authentic, how do you know if it's working if you don't know what that authentic you looks like? So let's talk about how to know yourself. Okay, I've got some notes right here that I think are going to be really helpful for us to be able to have this conversation. In order for you to be yourself, you have to know yourself. So how do you know yourself? Well, one of the first things is elimination of noise. Now, noise is going to be a very broad concept in this conversation that we're having here. Noise begins with other voices that are external, that are coming into us, telling us about how things are supposed to be and who we're supposed to be like and what we're supposed to dress like, what we're supposed to like and how we're supposed to work and exactly how we're supposed to do that and when we're supposed to do that and all of those kinds of things. And I don't know about you, but just saying that wears me out. And if we're constantly looking externally for things to tell us who we are, we're going to end up being something we maybe never intended to be. And if we ever wonder why we have different phases or maybe long periods of unhappiness, depression, and anxiety, it can often be because we're not living in congruency with who we actually are. So, eliminating noise. The voices of others. Number one, the media. Okay? Now, don't get me wrong, understanding what's going on in the world can be helpful, but we don't need to know everybody's everything. And quite honestly, you don't need me to tell you that media has their own agenda. They have their own agenda in terms of what they want to share with you and what they don't. And the spin they want to put on it and the spin that they don't. Whether it's political or religious or philosophical or. It doesn't really matter. But the fact of the matter is if you're looking to media to determine who you're supposed to be, you're going to get a lot of varying opinions, and very rarely will they ever be authentically who you are. Okay? So be careful about your consumption of outside voices, especially through media. Another voice that's going to be really important for you to eliminate and to reduce as much as possible is fear. Okay? Especially if you're paying attention to things like media and news and social media and all that stuff coming at you, it can create a lot of fear and anxiety and unrest and uncertainty inside of you, inside of me. Okay, so how can we eliminate that fear? Listen, I need you to know, your fears are poor advisors. They're terrible advisors at telling you who you are because they're usually telling you some other version. You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You can't ever get that raise. You'll never be able to run your own business. You're a terrible wife or husband. All of those kinds of things usually come from a place of fear, and we need to be able to reduce that fear, okay? All right. A third thing to consider when it comes to the voices and eliminating the noise is those voices and that noise, that's them out there telling you. They are telling you who you are and how to be. And I'm curious, who are they? And why are they running your life? That's a really important one to consider. Who are they? Can we even name them? And why are they running your life? Maybe it's time to put yourself back in power on that. All right, so next piece here about how to know thyself. I want you to consider your values. Okay, I want you to consider your values. Your values aren't going to be the be-all, end-all of determining who you are and how you are, but they're very, very good, can be a very strong indicator. And when I'm talking about values, I'm not talking about just likes and preferences and those kinds of things. I mean, if I have a sandwich, I prefer mayonnaise over mustard. That's not a value, okay? That's just a simple liking or a preference. What I'm talking about are the deep-seated subconscious values that sit in the center of who we are, and they determine the actions we take or don't take, even to the point of self-sabotage, okay? And what happens is because these values are stored inside of us on a subconscious level, which is where all of our memories are stored, we aren't often consciously aware of them when we're making our decisions. You see, all decision-making is done at a conscious level, okay? After the decision is made, then it's stored in our memory as a habit. All right. So if that's not available to us, then it's hard for us to make decisions based on those values unless we bring them into our conscious awareness. So how do you know? The question that you ask yourself about your true values to be able to determine and pull them out of you in a way to bring them into your conscious is to ask yourself the question, what's important to me? Now, you may need to pick a category of life, like in business or profession or in relationships or marriage or in my health. What's important to me about my health? What comes to mind? What are the first things? Write those things down. The first thing that comes to your mind, you want to write that down. Here's a hint about values. You're going to know that it's a true value because when you look at the past, look at your past life, you will see that they have consistently showed up time and time and time again in your past. Okay? If you have the value of security, you will see in the past how you've taken actions, you've put yourself in places and environments, and you've created relationships where you felt secure. So look at your history and ask yourself, what's important to me about blank, whatever that part of your life is, and then ask yourself, where has that shown up in my life and has it? And that's going to be a true indicator as to what your true values are, which are going to tell you a little bit more about who you are so that you can do you and be you. All right, another thing I want to share with you real quickly. The question to help you determine who you are is, what are your loves? Like, what are the things that make you come alive? Okay? Asking this question, what are my loves, is really a window into your heart. And my friend, your heart is the truest part of who you are. And when you can access those loves, those values that are part of your heart, only then are you going to get clear as to really who you are. You see, if the window if the loves are the window to your heart, and your heart is the truest part of you, you need to know that your heart is kind of like a wild animal. That if it feels threatened or insecure or scared in any way, shape, or form, it's going to go into hiding. It's going to run off into the woods. And the thing is that when our heart runs off into the woods, we can't live from our heart. When we're not living from our heart, we're not being you. You're not being authentic. You're not being yourself. You can't. Okay? When your heart's over here and your life's over here, you feel it and it doesn't feel right. So eliminate the noise and the voices. Understand and determine and elicit what your values are, and ask yourself the questions: what makes me come alive? What are my loves? What are those things that have always shown up and just things that really make me come alive? So that you can keep your heart close instead of spooking it away. All right, so here's the last thing. How do you know that whatever it is that you have in your life is you? How do you know that you are you? And there's two questions you're going to ask yourself. Okay, and this is going to be kind of the final piece of how to be able to determine that prerequisite of knowing yourself so that you can actually do you and be authentic. Question number one is, if I didn't have this in my life, what would I be willing to do to get it? This is very, very telling. I'm going to say the question again. If I didn't have this in my life, what would I be willing to do to get it? You see, if you can imagine yourself without that thing, and there's no real motivation or drive or interest in actually spending a lot of energy or effort to get it, if you didn't have it, then maybe it's not truly a part of being you. It's not that important or that essential. It's not one of your values or one of your loves. Really pretty cool, right? Okay, if I didn't have this in my life, what would I be willing to do to get it? If you have more willingness, chances are it's something that's a true value to you. Now, once you determine that, there's a caveat. This is not a caveat, a clarifier. There's a clarifying question that comes after this, and this is the second question. So once you've asked yourself, if I didn't have this in my life, what would I do? What would I be willing to do to get it? Then you need to ask yourself the next question, which is, looking into the future and imagining that you do already have it, would it lead you to fulfillment, to merely pleasure, or to pain? One of those three options. Those are basically the only three options. If I was looking forward into my future and you're imagining your future that you've already have this in your life, if you don't, okay, would it lead me to fulfillment, which is, by the way, what every one of us is after with everything that we do and everything we become? Would it lead me to fulfillment? Would it lead me to mere pleasure? Or would it lead me to pain? And this is going to help you determine this, because if you ask yourself the question, if I didn't have this in my life, what would I be willing to do to get it? I could ask that question about cocaine or meth. Gee, if I didn't have meth in my life, what would I be willing to do it? Well, I tell you what, from an addict standpoint, they're just about willing to do anything. Steal, hurt somebody, and that kind of thing to get it. So the next clarifying piece is to help make sure that whatever it is that you are getting, whatever it is that you're willing to give yourself for, is actually something that's going to help you become happy and the best version of yourself and healthy. One more time, the two questions are, if I didn't have this in my life, what would I be willing to do to get it? And looking into the future, if I already had it, would it lead me to fulfillment, to just mere pleasure, or to pain? And you have to decide which of those things you're going to sign up for in your life. I trust this was helpful. Given our modern society and a lot of the things that get perpetuated to us, like be you, do you, you can't do that stuff if you don't know what that is. And that clarity is going to be really, really important, because we end up doing something that we think we're trying to be ourselves, and for some reason it feels like it doesn't work. And then we have more unhappiness, and then we feel like we're not good enough, because it's like, wait, everybody's saying do you, but I don't feel like I'm doing me because it doesn't feel right, and it just becomes this ugly cycle. So, know thyself to be thyself. You know I love you. Be great. It's what you're made for.